What is up, YouTubers? Got quite a pile of crap here on the desk. So rather than cleaning that up, let's talk about some welding hoods. So let's get into it. So thought, why not sit down here on the floor where it's at least reasonably clean and take a look at some welding helmets. And I'm going to give you guys advice on what to look for, what the differences are between like low end and high end, some information on how to set these things, and really, I guess, give you a better idea of what you need for your application. Now, I'll say right away, you may hear some rain in the background. It's piss poor and cats and dogs outside, so there's nothing I can do about it. So, just so you know. So, I have a Harbor Freight cheap Chicago Electric. This is probably similar to the first welding hood I ever had that was auto darkening many years ago, back when everything I welded would either fall off or break. So, very familiar to most of us, or at least a lot of us. I have a Lincoln face mask, which I did a video on this back when my channel was in its infancy, and I didn't know really what the hell I was doing. So I'll bring that back out. And then, of course, the welding helmet that I've used virtually in every video that you've probably seen me weld in, which is the Lincoln Viking 3350. Awesome welding helmet. And I will talk about all the differences between these, but let's start with this guy right here. So there's a lot of differences, far more than just the size of the screen and the plastic they're made out of when it comes to welding hoods. This is about as basic as you can get for an auto darkening. What you actually view through is this small section right here. This is a solar array to charge the onboard batteries. I don't know if this has batteries built in, but it's very common for these cheaper ones to charge an internal battery pack via the solar array, and that's what switches on and off the auto darkening. And it does it pretty fast, like in, I don't know, a 20 thousandths of a second. So pretty cool technology. This being, I don't know, 30 bucks, 20 bucks with a coupon, sub 40 we'll call it, is cheap, but it's usable. And I say that because I have one here that I bought for this video so that I could actually weld with it, see what I think of it. And I gotta say, either they got a little bit better than I remember, or I'm a better welder than I remember, because I seem to be able to make pretty decent welds with this, and it's not like horrible, in my opinion, on viewing the weld pool with this, surprisingly enough. So like I said, maybe they're better than they used to be. But there's a lot of things that you're not getting when you buy something this cheap. And the number one thing, and a lot of people have asked me to talk about this, is the headgear. When you buy a cheap hood like this, the headgear, the auto or the self-adjuster is cheap. The teeth in it tend to wear out fast. Now, this particular one is not that bad, but I bought a couple KT hoods, which is KT Welding, and they were cheap fixed shades. And I'm not even joking, within 15 minutes, this little adjuster here broke, and now you can't tighten it on your dome. So I ended up cutting it off and lacing surgical tubing through it and just using it, like where you pull the tubing back and slip it over your head, and it works fine for that. But the cheaper hoods universally have cheap headgear. And not only does the headgear typically not last, it's also not as adjustable. And let me zoom in here. All right, when you look at this headgear is adjustable to where the stop point is. So when you lift this thing and then rotate it, all that does is that when it sits down on your head, when it's locked in here, that basically limits how far down it will stop. That's the only adjustment that's apparent on here, other than the nut on this side. You can adjust the tension of how easy it is to flip down. So, and I'll show you. So this right here adjusts the tension, but what you're going to find is once this thing gets wore in, either it doesn't flip down or it always flips down. There's no in between with this setup the way that this is. The other interesting thing is it only has an adjuster on one side. The other side, there's nothing in here, which means that, this thing's fairly light, but when you got this thing clamped on your head, what it's going to end up doing is kind of cocking over on you, like you see here. And over time, as this thing wears in, because there's no stop over here like there is on this side, it's basically just, it's going to end up sitting crooked. So that's going to be a comfort issue. When you look here, this guy has a shade adjuster, which this to me is almost kind of pointless, because once you get good at welding, you don't really need to adjust the shade on the outside of the helmet. You either need to have it in grind mode where it's clear, or on the shade you pick. And for me, I generally use a shade 11 or 12 depending on what I'm doing. Maybe 10 if I'm welding at like 5 to 20 amps of TIG, I might go a little lower. But universally 11 to 12, well, I don't really need to adjust this out here. It would have been better if they just had an off-on switch to turn on the auto darkening. That would have helped out far more than this. But cheaper helmets, you may or may not have this. Better helmets, you generally will have a grind button and oftentimes not adjuster for the shade. Now, when you look at the cartridge that's in here, all right, so we have the inside of this Harbor Freight cartridge here, and this is very simple. We just have two knobs, sensitivity and delay. The shade is on the outside like we already discussed, so this is a real simple setup. Now, let's talk about this delay. The delay, the easiest way to describe what it does is when this thing is triggered in dark where you can't see shit through it, when the delay is very low, as soon as you stop welding, this thing's going to turn back to see-through. If you put it on max, you can stop welding and you can't see shit through this for probably 5, 6, 7 seconds. And what you want to do is adjust this somewhere in the middle. Now, what you're going to find is the delay is going to come more in handy on cheaper welding hoods like this than what you might expect on a higher end one. And that's because these things are generally pretty poor at picking up the electric arc or your welding arc. And what'll happen is if it's set too low, it's going to constantly pop in and out of auto darkening, especially if your arc is obstructed. Like say you're welding on a fence post or something, or a tractor, and like a hose or anything's in the way of the arc hitting this, it'll all of a sudden say, hey buddy, you're being abducted by aliens, watch these bright lights, it sucks, and you get flashed. So your sensitivity settings honestly need to be, in most cases, somewhere in the middle. And it all depends on the particular hood. Now, your sensitivity, not delay, that needs to be adjusted based on whether or not this is actually auto darkening for you. So again, this is how long it stays dark after it no longer detects an arc. This is basically a knob that says what this is going to consider an arc. If it's set way too high, you can sit there welding and it probably won't darken. If it's set way too low, anything will cause it to intermittently trip. And that becomes extremely important when you're welding outside. If your sensitivity is set too high, anytime there's any sunlight reflecting off of what you're welding on, it's just going to constantly auto darken. So these two are very important, and it's going to take some playing around to get these just right to where they work for you. But I gotta say, guys, honestly, 100%, when you get these cheap welding hoods, what you're going to find is they work really well on bench work and maybe a poorly lit shop. But if you're doing work outside on your family's tractor or fixing something like a fence post or a gate, these things, cheaper hoods in general, will intermittently flash you, and it's just, they're a handful. So these are best kept to a shop, I guess, or your garage, and they'll work fine for that. But it's professional, it's not, I guess. All right, let's look at the front. So I've been told that these little round circles, and sometimes they're squares, are actually what picks up the electric arc. I don't know if that's true. If you know that to be true or not true, leave a comment about it. You can help everyone else out. This particular hood has just a simple replaceable plastic screen available at any Harbor Freight and probably off of Amazon. Very good to keep that clean so you can see what the hell it is you're doing. Inside also has a replaceable screen, and this one's pretty filthy. The cartridge on this does pull out of here with these two knobs. Like I said, I don't believe that there's a battery inside of here that's replaceable. It uses a solar panel right here to charge that. So I think you have a pretty good idea of like what a cheap welding hood is and what to expect. Let's look at something a little better. This has been my welding hood for God knows how long, since these almost came out. So 5, 6, 7 years, somewhere in that ballpark. And I bought it primarily because of the cool decals, which you can get flames on these Harbor Freights if you so desire to make yourself one of the cool welders in the back of the class. But honestly, you know, I bought it because of the look, and this is a very good, well-known hood, the Viking 3350. Now, this predates the newer ones that have a grind button on the side, which infinitely useful more than likely, because anytime you want to grind with this hood, you have to flip it up and switch to grind mode on a little lever that's pretty much impossible to turn with full-size welding gloves on. Having a grind button, you can just press and release it, and now it won't auto darken, which makes it awesome for grinding and then welding back to back. Now, on face value, there's a lot of differences between these two. When you look at them, well, you can tell that this, obviously, this purplish blue hue area is a much bigger shade, okay? So you have a much bigger field of view with this. It does have like a little solar panel down here, but I'll be honest, I don't think it charges a battery or anything. I'm not really sure what it does, because this thing goes through a battery about once a month, once every 2 months, depending on how much you're welding. The Miller equivalent of this is much better on battery life, but it has like 2 or 3 batteries in it, so of course it would be. It uses the same amount of juice, it's just it has more batteries. This also has the little sensors. This, I believe, has 4 sensors that will pick up the electric arc versus the 2 that are in there. This tends to be more reliable on picking up arc, the light from the arc, and darkening. So it's just more, I guess, when you're welding outside, when you're welding around pipes, when you're welding in obscured vision, this is far less likely to flash you than the cheaper hoods. Now, there's a lot more different than just that. Let's look at this headgear. So there's a stark difference in the quality of the headgear that you have with this unit over like a cheaper welding hood. And I wish this is something that you guys could experience yourself easily. I mean, maybe if you go down to your local welding store, you could try a few on. But the quality of this headgear, yeah, it's all plastic, but it fits better. It's more comfortable. Like the sweatband, which is replaceable, is bigger and more padded, and this thing is quite old and probably could, yeah, it's all cracked, could use replacement. I'm not going to, though. It has 2, and there you go, you can see that better. Should have said something. 2 of these that go on top of your head, both of which are adjustable, so that you can get this thing to sit exactly where you want on your head. So for height off of your head. So that's awesome. And it also has adjustability with this slider here to adjust how far off your face it is. So you can bring it closer to your face, you can push it away, you can bring it up and away. You have almost, you know, so much more adjustment than cheaper hoods. So no matter what head shape you have or how you like your hood to sit, you can adjust it. And if you notice, it's adjustable on both sides. So this does not have that where you're only adjusting one side. So this thing sits square on your head without any problems. These knobs here are much more adjustable. They're held captive so they don't just fall off when you unscrew them. I believe the Harbor Freights are probably captive too. But the adjustment on these things I can finely tune adjust this to where it flips down at exactly the amount of head flip that I want, you know, like that. That alone takes a lot of stress off you, because if you've welded enough, you know that when that thing, like, either it doesn't come down or it comes down constantly. And now granted, these aren't fixed shade lenses, so that matters more with a fixed shade, but just the fact that this works better is huge in my book. And you guys got to remember, I don't know if you can tell by the filth level in this thing. This thing has been used as a primary welding hood on countless jobs for 4 or 5 years, maybe even more than that. And it not only still works, but the headgear is still intact. I guarantee you, if you put 5 years of solid welding behind that, the headgear is going to be trash and the whole thing probably won't work. So, you know, I'm just being honest here. And when you look at like this adjuster, this is what commonly fails on these welding hoods. And this thing, listen to it. You got big, beefy clicks out of it. Like, it seems to be solid rubber knob. It's just, when you use it all day long, this works so much better than a cheap hood. And also, if you look here, you see how this thing is on a swivel? The reason for that is so that you can grab it like this and flip it back over your head, and you don't have to constantly loosen and then tighten this to make it work. And when you're in a shop or doing projects like I do, or, you know, working on stuff, you can just flip it on and now it's on your head. It's just so much easier to work with. Now, I'll show you the cartridge here, but I want to cover this really quick. The weight of this tends to be a bit heavier than like even a cheaper one. And that can be something, if you have a bad neck or neck problems, and that can be a detriment. So it's something you should look at, and you probably should go to a normal welding store and try on some hoods to see what you like the weight of and how it feels. Because especially if you're spending $200-300, get something that you know is going to work for you. All right, let's look inside at this cartridge. So inside this cartridge, it's a little bit different than the cheaper hoods generally. Up here, which of course is not in focus because how close I gotta be here, that's a shade adjuster. So shade 5 and 6 for like cutting, you have to slide it to the left, and then shades 9, or actually 5 through 8 is to the left, 9 through 13 is to the right. So that just adjusts the scale that is your shade here. Now, unlike the Harbor Freight one, this shade is adjusted in here. So I prefer it here rather than on the outside. If you want a knob on the outside, make it to where that's your on-off for the darkening mode. This has a sensitivity, and this is what I was telling you guys is kind of bullshit, because imagine this thing, I have big thumbs and fingers. You look at how small this is. Imagine with like stick welding gloves trying to screw around with it. I find you almost have to use one finger and do this. But to put this on grind mode, you have to go like this. And you can see I'm having a hard time. Now it's on grind, and then of course, you grind something, you get to welding, and then you strike an arc and realize that you're blind because, well, you had it on grind, and you have to flip it back up and do that. So the newer version of this hood, and many of them out there, have a grind button. I would recommend get a grind button, like on the outside. So sensitivity, this is delay time. So the delay time on this functions just like the other welding hood in most of them, where it's the time after it detects an arc. So if you're having an issue where you're flashing yourself, again, due to obstructed arc hitting this, you want to increase the delay time just so it stays dark longer, and it reduces the chance of you getting flashed. The sensitivity on this is pretty good. I generally run, I don't know where it was, probably like right here. That's halfway on this. If it's too high, anything triggers it. If it's too low, you're going to get abducted by UFOs and basically blinded all the time. This does have a test button, which you can see it just auto darkened. I'm not sure if the delay, let me turn the delay all the way up. Yeah, that doesn't make a difference with the test button. That bypasses this, so not a big deal. I generally run delay fairly low because I don't have an issue flashing myself. And speaking of flashing yourself, this has UV protection even if it's not auto darkened. So if you're not going to get arc eye if you're TIG welding or stick welding and you got your face up in it and you inadvertently cut the auto darken cuts out and you get flashed, this will protect you from UV rays, so your eyes will be somewhat safe. However, you're still staring at a bright light bulb, and that is not going to be good. You're going to be seeing green stuff and stars, and it will screw up your vision. So it's going to take some playing with the settings to get it to work right. Now, this, like I had said, has a battery compartment, and that is right here. This uses a battery. I'm not sure what the solar array on the front is for. This thing eats batteries pretty good because it only has one watch cell battery in here versus a lot of them out there have 2 or 3, and they last longer because of that. You're still spending the same amount of batteries, you just don't go through them as fast. To remove this is kind of like the Harbor Freight. This you pop in and the whole cartridge comes out. The Harbor Freight has 2 pins you unscrew, so nothing too fancy there. Let's look at the front of it. So like I had said, more sensors, bigger viewing area, battery powered. This could leave you high and dry if the battery was dead and you need to do some welding. I've never seen this thing self-charge, so either it's defective or it just doesn't, and I think it doesn't. But the headgear, infinitely better. This will survive 3 to 5 years of moderate use without any issue. And I know for a lot of you guys, you don't want to spend the money on something like this. And the great news is that like this has an extremely clear, high clarity screen. Like when I'm welding with this, I can see every precise detail, like with TIG, far better than I can with a cheaper hood. So you get an exceptional clarity with the Viking helmets. Luckily, if you're on a tighter budget, you don't have to get the one with the big viewing area. You can get the same lens clarity, and I think it's the 1850 series. I'll put it up now. And it has a smaller viewing angle, similar shell to it, but it will give you all the clarity in a smaller viewing angle and size. If you're on a budget, look at that. Even more so, if you're on a budget, look at buying one of these either lightly used or sometimes they show up on Marketplace new in a box that someone got as a gift and just wants to get rid of it. You'll save yourself $100 or something, so that's worth it. Now, the question comes up, is it really worth having a big viewing screen? And I can tell you for me personally, absolutely. But I do a lot of repair work and I'm at weird angles where I might be welding on something up here and I can't tip my hood up. Having a wide viewing angle is very helpful because I know that when I crawl under a dumpster or something, I can see at any which angle out of this, regardless of where my face is positioned in there, and I can see what I'm welding. When a lot of guys kind of give me crap for saying, yeah, wider is better. And they say, oh, all you need is you got a 2-inch screen or inch, even better, 1.5 inch fixed shade. That's all you need. Well, yeah, that's great until you crawl under something, realize that it's offset. You need to see right where my finger is, and it's up here. So now you strike an arc, you realize you can't see anything. So now you have to reposition your hood. You understand what I'm saying? Like this only sees with a smaller window like this. This is just flat out easier. So in my opinion, it's worth it to get a good wider one. Now, if you're on a budget, hey, who gives a shit? Buy a cheaper one and practice more to where you can get good with it. It's not the end of the world. This isn't going to make you the world's best welder like practice will, but it is very helpful to have a bigger screen, especially if you want to grind some stuff. You can actually have this on your dome and look down at your hands and see what you're doing and look forward. Your peripheral vision is just far out better with this than a smaller screen. So, all right, I think I've been enough of a salesman on that. Let's put that off and look at the face mask. We're going to kind of quickly go through this because most of this is just repetitive BS that you already understand. This is a face mask. This is meant to get in extremely tight places because you can see how close it would sit It's like basically a pair of goggles. Sits right on your face. Infinitely valuable for doing race car tubular roll cages. I've done a ton of them on with this, and like cages and Jeeps, all sorts of tight work like that, or just welding exhaust under a car. Very valuable piece of equipment. Not for everyone. They're not typically cheap. You can actually get these with a fixed shade that might help you out as well, but I'm more of a guy, I like the auto darkening. This, because they're basically goggles and there's no way to adjust parameters inside, you adjust it out here. So you have off, on, you have shade, up or down, you have a test, and then you have function where you can set this for grind or welding, etc. This has a clip-on, which I never bought, for a light, LED light, probably pretty handy. This has 4 sensors on it, one here, one here, one here. I generally don't get flashed with this, but I'll be honest with you guys. This does not work as good as the Viking 3350 as far as like its ability to pick up an arc, especially at lower amperage. But again, this is a specialty piece of equipment. There's got to be limitations to it. The actual clarity of this is the same as that hood. So the visibility, like the quality of what everything looks like, the colors is all great with this. It's just that no matter how I've adjusted the sensitivity and the delay, I can't get it to perform as reliable as that. But that's okay. It doesn't need to be. This isn't something I would want to wear all the day at the shop because it's like wearing ski goggles. Now, this thing, I don't know, and you probably can't see it, I bought it and used it like twice, and the lens internally was cracked. I don't know if I did that because I was welding out in the cold with this a number of years ago, or if it came that way. But regardless, this is not as durable, I can tell you for a fact, as that. Now, this still works, and I'm probably an idiot for still using it. And these lenses, which it's the actual cartridge that's cracked, not the inner or outer replaceable lens. But it still works. I still occasionally use it now, and I'm getting kind of too old to crawl under cars, so it sees limited use. But you may want to look at something like this for tight work. It's an option. All right, let's go to conclusion. So like I said, I think that Harbor Freight is better than they used to be because the actual color of it doesn't look that much different from the Viking to that. However, it's so hard to describe when you actually weld with these what the difference is to the arc that you really have to just try them. And I'll put it to you this way, guys. I tried for 2.5 hours to get arc footage with TIG and stick with these, well, just these two. And no matter what I did, I could not get the video footage to accurately represent what I felt was the differences. Because on the arc footage, because you're kind of viewing it much bigger than what you normally would, everything looks so clear, yet to me when I'm using them, there's differences. So I hate to tell you, but I don't really have arc footage for this to show you, but there are subtle differences. I can see more color with the Lincoln Viking. So like if I'm welding stainless, I can literally see what the oxide color is trailing behind the weld, which tells me if I'm running too fast, too slow, too much, amperage too little. I can literally deduce all of that using that. I cannot do that with that. So the differences in that, will it make you a better welder? Well, for the TIG art that I do, yes, absolutely. For just welding stuff together, probably not so much, to be honest. So the color clarity, better, probably less of a selling point for most of you guys. The higher quality headgear is huge. If you use it more than to weld a couple fence posts together, you'll be far happier with a higher end Lincoln Viking, Miller, or Optrel. Any of those are so much better for the headgear. And if you, by the way, if you guys got a favorite one that you really like, put it in the comments so other people can read it and maybe look at it as an option. There's also something to be said for reliability. I didn't test reliability in this, but I can tell you that I was doing a tow truck repair job about a week ago at negative, I'm not even exaggerating, negative 12 outside with a 20-mile-an-hour wind. And I planned on filming the whole thing. My camera batteries died. I put brand new charged batteries in the camera I'm filming this on. Those died. And then the microphone, which is fully charged, died. I went with a backup microphone. That died. And this is all in 10 minutes because the cold was so extreme. It literally, all my equipment failed. Yet I still finished the job. I was welding with this thing. And the inside, I am not exaggerating. The inside of here, this whole area had ice on it, about a 1/4 inch thick, and there was ice starting to build up on the screen from my breath. Because, well, at negative 10 plus degrees, you're going to start getting frost and stuff. And this thing still worked. I was able to withstand an hour and a half of welding outside, and it still works today, and it worked through that job, and it's already been through 5 years of abuse and still works. I know for a fact reliability, I almost guarantee you that this thing, being that it has no internal battery and likely charges off that solar panel, if that sucker got to negative 12 with a wind and I'm huffing and puffing, moisture-laden air, it probably would have failed on me. That's why, like, if you need something to work, the reliability, buy a better hood. This, for 5 years, I've had zero issues other than when a battery dies. I know in the past I've used a lot of cheap ones, and I generally get like one semester in school and it craps out on me. Although, like I said, this seems to be far better than the ones that they used to push at the old Harbor Freight. So maybe they've learned, but who knows. Now, price-wise, like I had said earlier, don't pay retail for this. This one's fancy. The current one's probably $280 to $350 for the steampunk version. Go find the all black one, used or new in a box on the Facebook Marketplace. You'll probably only pay $180. I know that's a lot of money, but it'll last you forever. Well, 5 years. And it will arguably make you a better welder. At least you can't use it as an excuse that you can't see something as to why your welds are so trash. Or at least that's what I used to do. So again, if you're on a budget, yeah, you can pick one of these up. And I'm not making fun of you. Hey, get out and practice. Who gives a shit? Buy something like this. It will work for a while. But if you got the couple extra bucks, you'll be far happier with that. And it will last you and is far more comfortable. And that matters. Your ABCs of welding, guys. Always be comfortable. Goes a long way. With that said, like I said, if you got a favorite welding helmet hood that you like or something that has worked well for you, share it. And I know some of you guys just love fixed shades, and that's fine. I don't particularly like them. I do own one. It's in my service truck. And it's always there because I know no matter what the temperature, it will work. But I have yet to bust that out on a job over this. This thing's been stone cold reliable. So I'm going to stick with that. And pretty soon I'm going to be buying a new welding hood. And I will be buying the same one as that. So that's where my money's going. And no, I'm not a shill for Lincoln. But hey, this has treated me well and it's lasted. Anyways, with all that crap said, overall, you get what you pay for. It's no different, but hopefully you guys learned a little bit about the differences and realized that, yeah, they're all hunks of plastic, but in the frustration and usability, far better with better stuff. And if you got any comments, questions, thoughts, feel free to leave them. Until next time.